Final Stop Brasil, Chapter 43. Fortaleza in Brazil. Jeff, Gibraltar. Caesar picked me up at the airport, but I was already stressed up at the arrival. My suitcase was gone, and so I stood there rather stupid with my hand luggage. Before I had problems with the computer, I had to enter my details to have the visa printed out electronically. A seemingly unique method in Ceará. For this I knew of no other country I had traveled so far. Somehow it functioned. Half of it I didn't understand, and the people waiting behind me made me nervous in addition. Caesar took it all very amusing, and wanted to show me the beach first, so I would calm down. Directly opposite our hotel. In fact, this beach was beautiful. We took a walk on the beach, which was, however, not very extended. After only a short while, I had already blisters on my feet because of the sneakers I wore. They were far too hot. My slippers were together with my other clothes in the disappeared suitcase. This is indeed starting well, if I have to go buy new clothes, I mumbled. But they told you at the airport it takes up to 3 days until the suitcase will be found, Caesar argued. The hotel provided me with bathing suit and beach sandals, and after 2 days I was allowed to pick up my suitcase from the airport. In these 2 days I was in love already with Fortaleza and the vast palm-fringed beaches. The warm sea with waves playing with my body. We walked from the beach in front of our hotel to the Praia de Iracema. The Ponte Inglés, indulged in a delicious lunch in one of the many good restaurants. I admired the small, colorful houses. In the evening, live bands were playing here, and it was wonderful to watch the sunset. Then we strolled back along the beach in the other direction, where a street market was open every night until midnight. Next to very cheap clothes, I admired many handsome pieces, hand-painted glasses filled with sand. I looked at handmade jewels, and all my cares were forgotten when I drank my first agua de coco. The second day we spent at the Praia de Futura, where, in contrast to the beach in front of our hotel, the nature was exquisitely preserved, and we even could see free-flying parrots. The waves were not as high and violent here. We observed the preparation of lobster and crayfish on an open fire. Caesar, as always an adventurer, booked for us various day trips to beautiful beaches at the coast of Ceará. Our first goal was Canoa Quebrada. We reached after several hours of interesting ride on a coach through the dry and dusty roads. We were rewarded with a wonderful landscape of infinity, continuing wide sand dunes. Went on a buggy ride with an experienced driver. Without knowing, I had allowed myself to this, but it was a roller coaster ride because the dunes were just as steep uphill as they were downhill. The landscape changed, however, and varied from white limestone rocks to reddish rocks, from where we had a wonderful view far down to the sea. To reach the beach, we had to descend stairs built into these cliffs. An incredible white beach. Never before had I seen so much fine sand before even reaching the shore. Far from the giant hotel complexes, this paradise here was still completely natural. After a delicious grilled fish and a wonderful combination of adventure and bathing day, we rode back to Fortaleza. At the Playa de la Goiânia, I became quite brave while Cesar went diving, and rented a quadriciclo, a four-wheeled vehicle almost like a motorcycle, but with thick tires as in the stroller, absolutely beach adapted, and felt like an outlaw as I rode along the beach, passing the palms and small fishing boats. Everywhere on this beach were small waterholes where children and non-swimmers were bathing. However, I left everything behind me and was one with nature. Unfortunately, one of these waterholes was becoming my fate in the solitude, and I stayed put. These quadricicles are very heavy. I couldn't, of course, manage to free myself out of the waterhole, and stood there, solitary in the middle of the beach. I was overcome by an attack of panic, when finally, after some time, a beach buggy passed, and the driver helped me out of the muddy sand. After grilled lobster, relaxing on the beach, and swimming in the sea, we rounded off the day in a club, where the waiters presented acrobatics with fire. Only the techno and house music was not exactly my case. While Cesar was on training for kite surfing, I allowed myself a boat ride through the rims of the sea, passing mangrove forest. Here I met a newly married couple from Sao Paulo, passing their honeymoon. Was there anything more romantic? I learned the man was a native of Fortaleza, his occupation pilot, and he regularly flew back and forth between Fortaleza and Sao Paulo. But now he wanted to show his home to his newly wife. We agreed to meet a few days later because the next day we would travel to Jericoacoara, about 300 kilometers from Fortaleza. But Cesar convinced me this trip would be worth it. And it was indeed. The sea was quite stormy, and it was also fairly windy and dusty, but we found in a posada where we spent the night a wonderful protection from wind, with the opportunity to refresh ourselves at the pool in the shade of palm trees. The small town center was surrounded by sand. Here were no roads, just as no street lighting. Soon it was dark, but to watch the sunset here was a unique experience, as I never saw before. Despite the lack of lighting in the streets, life raged here, and it was all around a romantic ambient. On the second day, we hired a buggy to drive to the famous Pedra Furada, a romantic place for couples, but for this I lacked the appropriate person. Shortly before our return, I took a bath in a freshwater lagoon with lovely warm water. Cesar and I were of one mind. This spot was one of the most beautiful in the world. Back in Fortaleza, Wagner, the husband of the newly wedded couple, showed us a few places otherwise unlikely for tourists to find, like freshwater lagoons, small villages where fishermen proudly showed us their catch. I saw and ate, the first time, crustaceans, a delicacy. In between, we spent afternoons on the beach and just played like children in the sea. In the evenings, we visited restaurants together and bars at the Praia de Iracema. In the famous Pirata Club, where Monday evenings traditionally was the big forró live show, we learned how the Cearenses were celebrating. Hell was loose, and although it was not my style of music, I let myself be carried away after 2 caipirinhas and learned quickly this dance step. This was an absolute dream vacation. I had left Chris and everything else behind me, and was only reminded of him during the short telephone conversations when I made sure whether Michael and Max were okay. The friendship between Cesar and me was very close, but nothing ever happened between us. We both lacked that certain something. Therefore, I didn't feel jealous when Cesar flirted or spent the nights with a few holiday flirts. Shortly before the freshly married couple we became friends with left again, they invited us to a restaurant in the back streets near the beach. On the romantically lit patio, we sought out a table. From my chair, I noticed first a very sexy ass repeatedly walking past, and followed it fascinated with my eyes. The rest belonging to this ass almost hit me off the chair, and I was completely absent of any conversation at the table. When our eyes met, something hit me like an electric shock. Irritated, I ordered some menu our friends recommended, but didn't even taste it. This waiter was a Brazilian like out of a picture book, with a dangerous flicker in his dark eyes. I was lost. Cesar didn't escape this, of course. Grinning, he nudged me in the side. I just looked at him bewildered. At breakfast he said, "It was about time you find yourself something for a little fun. Otherwise the 2 weeks will pass and you have missed the best. If the men are as good as the Brazilian women, then you really missed something here." Playful, I gave him a slap on his shoulder. But when Cesar was about to go to the beach, I excused myself and left short time later the hotel to go to this restaurant. In fact, Jefferson was there, greeted me immediately. I wouldn't let nobody else than he himself serve my table, from where I was able to track every movement of this fiery Brazilian. He took every opportunity to come to my table. However, his boss was standing some distance away, and paid close attention that his waiter not flirted with a female guest. Jefferson's glances, however, spoke volumes. The next day I was also back in the restaurant. Cesar had me figured out long ago, and 5 minutes later was sitting at my side before Jefferson had time to bring the menu. But when he saw how Cesar put his arm in a friendly manner around me, he angrily threw the menu he wanted to bring me over to his colleague. Neither he came to the table, nor did he give me one more glance. For me, this day was done. I was pissed off with Cesar. Finally, I had only a few days left. "Tudo bem?" Jefferson asked, polite but reserved. I replied, "No, nada está tudo bem. Estou sozinha sem namorado." I gathered up all my courage to let him know this, and above all, how to pronounce it right. Jefferson understood the message, and beamed at me with his sparkling black eyes. Unfortunately, it seemed as this would be it for the day, and my time was running out. Desperately, I thought about what I could do. Finally ordered after dinner from another waiter 2 coffees. The waiter looked at me quite surprised. "The second is for your colleague." He knew immediately which colleague was meant. The last barriers fell between us, but his boss kept watch on him. Frustrated, I made a move to leave when Jefferson was suddenly behind me, holding me back by my arm, and told me, "Wait for me. In an hour I'll finish work." During this hour, He kept sneaking to my table to have a few words with me. At last we left the restaurant together. He took off his tightly knotted tie and looked even better without. It was already late when he invited me for a drink. We sat close to the sea. I could feel butterflies in my stomach since a long time, and when we left, he pulled me into his arms, admitted he had fallen in love with me from the moment he saw me. Time and time again we kissed. Kisses full of passion, full of fire, Brazilian fire. He awakened a desire long been buried. Jefferson was the first white man in my life who caused this burning passion. All night we made love in my hotel room. I could not get enough of this mixture of passion and tenderness. In those remaining 3 days, Caesar hardly saw me any more. Jefferson took time off from work, and we spent every minute together, mostly in bed. This brief period of happiness flew by too fast, but in this short time I knew Jefferson was the man I loved, but once again had to cope with the separation. Frankly, I wept bitter tears as the moment of parting came. We vowed to stay in touch, and I already knew I would return very soon. In El Palo, it was already cold and rained a lot. If I wasn't on my way looking for work, I sat depressed at home. The relationship between Chris and me was quite tense. For my part, it was all over. And Chris? He reacted quite indifferent, and also didn't press me any more. Instead, he let me be in my room alone. From Kande and the other neighbors, I had withdrawn myself completely. Still, I was ashamed for the house search in the presence of the neighbors. Glad and grateful I was that at least nobody was punishing Michael for what happened, and treated him as kind and loving as before. Nevertheless, I wasn't feeling well anymore in this place. This, however, had also a very different reason. Jeff. I nearly died longing for him. Finally, I found the love I missed so much after Collins had gone, and found it now tens of thousands of kilometers away from me. Every opportunity I used to call Jeff, to hear his voice. Every night I watched our shared photos, and the ones I shot of him alone, only with the one score in mind, as fast as possible back to Brazil and back to Jefferson. Chris sniffed around in my room one day, found the photos, and took me to task. Yes, I have found my great love in Brazil, and you've never been interested in me. What is this noise about now? Don't worry, everything remains the same, at least initially. I know you need me to show the civic life for your conditional freedom. I just wonder seriously what we're going to live off. You're not getting the idea to look for a job beside your school, are you? There was a violent dispute. Some evil words fell. I threatened him to testify at the trial against him, a threat I should pay dearly. My unemployment benefits had long since expired. I asked myself desperately how this would continue. Chris voluntarily gave money for purchases, money from his fraud. I completely disagreed, but not to use up all my reserves remained me no other choice. For Michael, I shortened drastically the pocket money. Admissions for cinema or crepes were no longer accepted. In the locutorio, I now sought more frequently Brazilian sites with job offers, and found quite a few for multilingual staff. One day I took Michael aside and began cautiously with a proposal to leave Spain. It was ultimately not just about my love for Jefferson, but our existence was threatened here. Plus, it was about my decision to enter Chapter Chris, definitely. What meant for me a spatial separation also. Michael, however, rejected categorically. "You wanted me coming back with you to Spain. Now you want to go to Brazil? Then go if you want, but without me. I will stay here." Just by the way Michael was looking at me, I knew he was very serious. "You'd let me, in all seriousness, go alone?" I asked again. Michael nodded his head. It didn't help that I explained to him why, and that I simply didn't find work. It didn't interest him. For him, his world had always been in order. How much I suffered from Chris, Michael knew nothing. Everything I had always kept away from him. 2.5 weeks before Christmas, I flew again to Fortaleza and directly into Jeff's arms. We had 2 wonderful weeks of love, sun, beach and sea. Jeff showed me some nice places I didn't know until then. I met Jeff's family and learned how those poor people lived, and only with the necessary they needed, but still they were happy and laughing. Of Jeff I learned he was divorced without children. In the midst of this paradise, the locals were living below the breadline. Jeff supported with his work the 7-member family, and aunts, uncles, and children of siblings and cousins. Jeff was never in a bad mood. He laughed always, and kissed me at every opportunity. Linguistically, there were some problems, but somehow we understood each other great. When I told him my problems, Jeff immediately began to forge plans. Yes, he wanted me here in Fortaleza. Jeff wasn't particularly great in bed, but he gave me so much love, I didn't mind that several times I didn't have an orgasm with him. While Jefferson was at work, I rummaged in the shopping centers, which were all decorated for Christmas, and in such an extent and beautiful way as I never saw before in Germany or Spain. No doubt Brazil showed more imagination and creativity. Spellbound, I looked at the made-up Santa Claus sitting on an oversized throne and speaking to children who came to him. However, he received also the adults, who crossed themselves first before kneeling before him, receive his blessing, and to express wishes. There were certainly no wishes for gifts, just wishes for a better life. When I saw the poverty on the streets, people who were begging for a piece of bread or being happy about 10 centavos, rejoicing in the garbage for food, I felt like crying. Regularly, I gave money to the poor beggars. All I had on me. This, Jeff observed, quite suspicious. I became furious when I watched in the evening at the beach how mothers offered their 12, 13 years old daughters to the tourists. The mothers agreed the price and then subsequently called the somewhat distant waiting girl, or sometimes they were dancing with other girls same age to the music of the bars. These children then left with the suitors the beach to return later. The police was present everywhere, but it didn't affect them. However, they didn't take any knowledge or didn't want to. So I now learned at the same time the dark side of this paradise. But I was convinced of it. I could live happily here with Jeff and Michael. Jefferson adored me, scraped money together to offer me something. When one of the best samba bands of Brazil was having a show in Fortaleza, he invited me to the show. This woke the first time my samba fever. The typical musica nordestina, forró, I wasn't particularly interested in, but it was fun to dance with Jeff to this music. He was a very good dancer. A day after the samba show, he gave me a CD with samba music, and as farewell gift, my favorite perfume, which was, for his standards, much too expensive. One day before Christmas Eve, I returned to Malaga and rushed myself to bring the apartment into shape, which was quite deteriorated. and make some Christmas preparations. Late in the evening, I bought an artificial Christmas tree. But Christmas Eve, I sat alone in front of it with Max. Michael was with his friends, and Chris, who knew it? Why, and for what, had I returned at all? Peevish, I started the Christmas day and looked into two faces opposite me with a bad conscience. In order to relent, Chris invited us for dinner, but we were far from any Christmas mood. Chris and I had absolutely nothing more to speak with each other. My birthday passed similar. Instead of celebrating, I went to bed early. The new year, 2004, began depressing, cold and with rain. But for the beginning of this year, I made a decision. After a further conversation with Michael, I had realized he would never go with me to Brazil. So, if there was no work for me here, I would just go where they needed me. Gibraltar. There I had at least the opportunity to make money for financing my travels to Brazil. Because for me it was clear I would not give up Jefferson. Again, I packed my suitcase and drove with the car. By now I had long possessed another car. To Gibraltar. There I rented a hotel room and made myself familiar with the peninsula. Daily I distributed my applications and went for interviews to staffing firms. After 2 weeks, British curry, stew, and freezing cold weather, because this terrible cold wind was blowing from the Atlantic, I brought some promising interviews behind me, was tenant of a room with a lady in a big apartment in La Línea, the Spanish border town, but still had no job. For me it was clear I would not drive 400 kilometers every day. I also wanted to target the distance to Chris. The relationship between Michael and me was not exactly the best at this time. Of course, I saw his point. He didn't want to leave his surroundings and his friends, but my limit was reached. There was no work for me here, and to continue to live at the expense of this drug dealer and fraudster, only so Michael was well off, I could not anymore. Michael saw only one side, and had the opinion I only wanted to go to Brazil because of Jeff. When I tried to open his eyes and told him the truth about Chris, he didn't believe a word. In early February, I received the commitment of a large and well-known online betting company in Gibraltar. They had a vacancy in the customer care service. Since I was supposed to start work, according to the contract on the 1st of March, I could already figure out I wouldn't have rights to take leave too soon. So I flew spontaneously in February once again to Brazil. I didn't even care about a hotel room before, firm in belief I was able to find accommodation in the same hotel. This, however, was not so this time, because I had caught the carnival season. All hotels were completely booked to the roof. Jeff's family had no problem to let me stay in their house, where I shared a stuffy room with Jeff's 2 younger sisters. All treated me very nice, but I could hardly eat anything, because for my standards it was all a bit grubby. I also had problems to get used to the strange food. This, of course, led to embarrassing situations. Jeff was working much longer now, so we didn't really have 1 minute for ourselves. When I finally, with lots of luck, found a room in a simple hotel at the Praia de Iracema, led this the first time to tension between us, because Jeff didn't know how he should make it clear to his family that I wasn't really at ease there and preferred a hotel room. For him, I finally belonged to the family. Jeff didn't like when I moved alone through the area at daytime. I had to listen to, "You can't do this, you must not, and there, you definitely can't go alone," and so on. Mostly I stayed at the beach, took long walks, or sat in one of the beach bars. If I took lunch or dinner somewhere else than in the restaurant where Jeff worked, he didn't like it either. However, I wouldn't let Jeff prohibit anything. One morning, on the way to the beach, I found a boy, about 9 years old, lying with his black dog, very similar to Max, in the middle of the sidewalk, sleeping. I bent down to him and touched him, whereupon he stirred a little and looked around bewildered. In his eyes was deep sadness. "Is everything okay with you?" I asked him. He nodded, but I was not convinced. "Where are your parents?" "My mother is working. I don't have a father anymore." This pretty boy replied, "Are you hungry?" He shyly nodded his head. For me, the Brazilian money wasn't worth much compared with the euro. I took out 20 reais and invited him to come with me into one of the beach restaurants. I gave him the 20 reais and offered him, "You choose what you like to eat and drink, okay?" For me it was hard to imagine. This boy probably never in his life had 20 reais for disposal in order to buy whatever he wanted. He beamed now over his whole face. All the sadness and hopelessness had given way to a happy laughter while he ate a giant hamburger with fries, drank a Coke, and then ate ice cream. For his dog I ordered water. Again and again he hugged me when I refused to take back the change and declared it was for him. For this boy the day was a celebration. He followed me to the beach, and together we raved about in the sea. I enclosed this boy in my heart. From this day on, he waited for me every morning to follow me to the beach, and, of course, to eat, what didn't bother me. He was so affectionate and loving, it touched me. After the third meeting, I bought at the market in Fortaleza a t-shirt, a Bermuda shorts, and sandals, since his had been washed away by the sea, and he ran barefoot in the hot sand and on the road. In general, his clothes were fairly torn. When I brought him the new things, he crashed like a monkey around my neck, as if he never let go again. Proud, he left me with his new stuff in the afternoon. The next day he wanted me to follow him to his home, a shack in the middle of a favela. Tourists were strongly advised not even to go in the direction of this poor district. Here I saw more clearly the misery of these poor people who have nothing and fight daily for their handful of rice and beans. Nevertheless, Marcel's mother, a pretty young woman, alone with 2 more small children, offered me coffee and biscuits. The children shared the bed with their mother. In front of it were 2 old chairs and a small table serving as living room. Along with a badly equipped kitchen, this was it. In one corner I spotted the TV, but Marcel explained it didn't work anymore. There was no bathroom or toilet. My heart sank when I saw this while holding the cute little 8-month-old sister of Marcel on my lap. 200 reais I would absolutely be able to afford, and for Marcel's mother it was almost a month's salary. She worked as a cleaner and helper in the kitchen of a restaurant for a pittance. Her husband had suffered a deadly accident 6 months ago, she told me. When I told Jefferson about the fate of this family, he literally freaked out. "Are you crazy? You can't go into the favelas. It is far too dangerous. They can see immediately you are a tourist. You can be glad they didn't rob you. Don't do it again." But I did it again, to bring Marcel's mother the money. Indeed, I felt a little uncomfortable when I joined Marcel on the way for the second time. But I wore no jewelry, not even a handbag. The money was in my bra. 2 days before I left, Jeff told me he planned going to Sao Paulo to work there. His cousins were there and had already gotten a better paid job for him. The season was almost over, and this meant he might lose his job in any case. At best, still earned less than now. I didn't have a picture of Sao Paulo and couldn't imagine anything but a city. Jeff was already planning. I have the possibility to work as head waiter there. Will earn much more money, and above all, the whole year round. This means you could soon come with your son. What I earn will be enough for all of us. Until you have found work, we need not to worry. Surprised about so much enthusiasm, I put on the brakes. Jeff, I explained to you already. Michael will come under no circumstances with me to Brazil. Without Michael, I cannot stay here forever. For the first time, we ended up in a serious dispute because Jeff was not ready to lead on a permanent basis a long-distance relationship. If your son feels so comfortable in Spain and doesn't respect what his mother decides, then leave him there. I was so shocked, I asked Jeff to go and leave me alone. Even on the eve of my departure, I saw him no more and cried my eyes out. Without saying goodbye to him and his family, I flew back to Spain. After a long time, I visited Alicia, but restless as I was, I didn't stay too long. Moving out of the parking lot, my glance fell on the little house next to Alicia's hostel, especially on the sign in the window for rent. I parked in again, got out, wrote down the phone number on the sign, and entered the hostel again, in order to ask Alicia whether she knew the cottage and the owners. She did, and explained it was very pretty inside, and the friendly owner lived only a street away. After my return home from Brazil, I had talked with Michael and Chris about the fact that we had to save somewhere, and since I would be very soon 5 days a week in Gibraltar or La Linea, a 3-room apartment, perhaps even 2 rooms, would be far enough for us. Both realized I would tolerate no opposition. Chris was well aware something had to happen, otherwise we would very soon be left with nothing. Also, Michael was relieved. I had finally found work, and thus Brazil advanced for first in the distant future, but he knew I wasn't happy. When I saw this typical Spanish fisherman house from the inside, I was immediately in love. The rent was indeed the same as in our current apartment, but I decided anyway to move, because at least one of my problems was solved. I escaped the gaze of the neighbors and my shame. My advantage was I lived right next to my friend Alicia and 2 minutes from the beach. Therefore, also in the vicinity of my French friends. If Michael wanted to see his friends, well, he then had to be pedaling on his bike a bit further. With the owners I was quickly agreed, and the cottage was assured to me, even though we would not sign a contract until the coming month, because the son, the real owner, was only returning then from Africa. Saturday morning, I left to La Linea. Once again, Chris and I had been fighting the night before, and much worse. Michael was on the side of Chris again. No one said goodbye to me, and in La Linea, no one asked me why I had already moved into the room 2 days before the start of my work. It was raining like out of buckets, and it was bitterly cold. The view I had from the window of my room, directly on the sea, was rather dismal. Also the room was very cold and uncomfortable. There was a TV in the room, but I had never interest for the stupid Spanish television program. So this was how my life would be from now on. 5 days far away from Michael, Max, and El Palo, from my friends. I consoled myself with the thought that perhaps it would be quite different if it was only getting warmer. Here were also beaches. My first day at work was quite interesting. I learned many new things. Inevitably, I had to refer on sports, and if so, preferably soccer, to even get an idea of betting. My colleagues, an international staff from England, Spain, Gibraltar, some from Portugal, Greece, and Japan, were very nice. But most important for me was the high salary I earned and got paid in British pounds. In the evening at the border was, however, some unpleasant surprise waiting for me. Initially, I joined in an endless line of cars in front of the border. I tried to take it easy because ultimately no one waited for me anyway. I turned on my stereo, lit a cigarette. Now and then it went on gradually. After 2 hours I was finally close to the border, as initially my music went off, then the light, and ultimately I couldn't even move the steering wheel because it was an electronically controlled power steering. So I stood with a Nissan Bluebird in front of the border, not moving forward neither backward, holding up all the following traffic also. A friendly border official from the British side initially helped to push the car to the side, but concerning a tow truck, he referred politely to the Spanish border guards on the other side. The Spaniards fought a small private war against all the Englishmen in Gibraltar, earning big money and put flashy houses before the noses of the poor Spaniards. Since my appearance probably resembles more an Englishwoman than a Spanish one, I got this frustration now in full blow. No, he could not call a tow truck. After all, it was not his problem, and that was it. All my swearing and cursing didn't help. So I eventually went back to the British side, where they finally felt pity for me. Around 11 o'clock at night came the tow truck to load up the car and me to enter Gibraltar again, and then raced in monkey speed onto the steep Monkey Rock, so I was feeling sick. It was indeed, from this height, a stunning view over Gibraltar, but I didn't have too much of it. I remembered now the prevented trip Michael and I wanted to go on to the Monkey Rock. Now I was glad we didn't at the time. Eventually, he turned right in a dark corner and stopped at a remote workshop, called the owner on the phone, talked briefly with her, unloaded the car, and raced back with me down the hill again, towards the center, where he deposited me in a hotel. What other choice did I have? There was hardly a possibility in the middle of the night to get back to La Linea. The same night I talked to Linda, the shop owner, an Englishwoman, apparently quite funny, full of life, and helpful, because she promised to send me one of her mechanics in the morning to take me to work. Warren picked me up, took me to work, and picked me up again to chauffeur me then to the garage, where I now met Linda personally. I liked her immediately when she greeted me warmly and told me, to my relief, my car got a replacement alternator and was already finished. She invited me to stay for coffee, and so we realized very quickly we were on one wavelength. "Why don't you move in with me? I live alone in my big house, but I think we fit well together, and every now and then maybe we can do something together," she offered me spontaneously. Just as spontaneously, I accepted the same evening her offer when I saw her cozy, lovingly furnished large house. At dinner, we quickly agreed on the rent and had much to talk about. In Linda's house, I occupied a cute, bright room with a cozy bed. Incidentally, I had the company of Duke, Linda's shepherd dog, and Birthday, a tomcat, whom I basically had to pick out from any of my bags or suitcases, or we had to take apart half of the kitchen, because he was clamped between the cupboards. Linda cooked for me and treated me like a mother, so I initially did feel very comfortable. Somehow, she was girlfriend and mother substitute at the same time. The only thing irritating me was her addiction to the English soap operas on TV. Coronation Street was indeed still on. I knew this nonsense from the time when I was with Ian in England. These times I withdrew to read or sleep early. Linda could not inspire me for her passion. Jeff was still refusing to talk to me. I had no idea whether it was over or not, and suffered terribly from this situation. There was no possibility for me to fly to Brazil in the near future, because I had no right for holidays yet. Linda was aware of my unhappiness and tried to distract me as best as she could. We took Duke for long walks in the first sun rays, or visited Warren in San Roque. After the first 3 weeks, I was placed, like the other colleagues, into different shifts, because our office had to be manned 24 hours. I preferred the night shift, because I had free time during the day, and saved me also the long line of cars in front of the border. Also, I was getting on very well with my colleagues, especially with Bianca. I didn't meet them privately. Most of them lived in the center of La Linea. Linda warned me it was very dangerous there, especially late in the evening. Bianca lived far away, in Algeciras. Weekend work didn't bother me, either, because then I also spared the line of cars, and it didn't really matter whether I had my 2 days off on a weekend or during the week. Finally, it was becoming warmer, and I was looking forward to go to the beach. Linda showed me the beaches in and around La Linea. We met more frequently with Warren, who was a nice and witty interlocutor. In his company, I felt very well, although he didn't correspond to the type of man I liked at all. He started turning up at Linda's house, and I accompanied him to Malaga when he needed to renew his passport in the British Embassy. Some weeks I only had 1 day off, which wasn't worth it to drive back to El Palo. These times were very painful not to see Michael for 2 long weeks, but either way it was difficult for me to spend 5 long days far from Michael. I missed him very much, and he showed me also how much he was missing me when I returned home after 1 or sometimes 2 weeks. Unfortunately, there was nothing to be done about it, because I had to earn money, and this I indeed earned very much. After the day with Warren in Malaga, which had been very nice and was rounded off with a romantic dinner in a Thai restaurant, he started sending me SMS every day, or we talked on the phone. Linda seemed quite happy about something seemingly going on between Warren and me, because she had long since forgotten our agreement to do something or go out together. The reason was she had reconciled with her ex-boyfriend and only had eyes and time for him. Rarely the 4 of us did something together, like having an evening at her open fireplace with a bottle of wine. Not even to the beach she would come with me, so I went alone, even though Linda warned me it was very dangerous. Robberies and forays were not uncommon. One of these forays I indeed experienced, but it was a surprise of a different kind. I was lying on a beach bordered to a meadow and dreamt to myself until I actually fell asleep for a while. When I woke, everything was initially as before. The sea was at least still there. But behind me, I heard a strange noise, turned around, and looked directly at a herd of Andalusian fighting bulls. Far and wide was no human being around. Cold sweat of fear broke out in me. Slowly, very slowly, I got up, gathered my things, while I never let those bulls out of my sight for a second, which until then were grazing peacefully and apparently saw in me no enemy or intruder. However, it was clear one single wrong move could cost me my life, with those animals bred only for the bullfight. Quietly I slipped past them to climb the hill to the parking lot, as the bulls apparently followed the same idea. Slowly I turned around and made the long detour across the road. But when I finally reached the parking lot, the bulls were already there, circling my car, the only one there. I wondered what I could do. Wait? For how long? I took all my courage and circled around the bulls, step by step, moving towards the car. When I was about 2 meters away, already holding the keys in my hand, and breathed in relief, my phone rang. Some bulls lifted their heads, snorting angrily. With one jump, I was at the car. The key luckily slipped like automatically into the lock. I jumped into the car, closed the door from the inside. Despite my shaky hands, I turned on the ignition and gave full throttle through the middle of the bulls. Never again I visited any beach in La Linea. Warren and I spent much time together, since he was somehow the only friend I had in this region. He rented DVDs we watched together while sharing an ordered pizza. Sometimes he took me for a drive to show me around. Amongst other places, we spent a pleasant evening in Algeciras, where we stopped at a Mexican restaurant, had a wonderful meal with spicy food and drinks, and a very nice conversation. For Linda it was no longer a question we were a couple, but I wasn't sure of what I wanted, or what to think of Warren. On one hand, I felt attracted to Warren. On the other hand, I loved Jefferson. Although Chris didn't interest me no longer, we shared one bedroom again. It couldn't have been prevented. In our new home was no more spare room for me. We made the best of it and tried to maintain at least a cordial relationship. It was not always easy, for I had long realized Chris and I were far too different. If I tried to make the house nicer with decorations such as the large crystal bowl I had bought and filled with water, had nice little floating candles inside to leave it on the coffee table, on my next day I found the bowl evacuated far away because Chris didn't have sense at all for these things. To be alone with Michael 5 days a week seemed to overload him. The relationship between the two was now tensed, abundant, and so I planned to take Michael away from there. If not Brazil, then at least it should be La Linea, where we could be together again every day. I had definitely enough of Chris. When I received a call from Michael, just when I was enjoying the evening sun on a beach promenade in La Linea with a Tinto Verano, and him telling me our baby was gone. Chris wasn't careful when cleaning the cage, and let our small white bird fly outside. Thus, I was sad and angry at the same time, but Michael once again defended Chris. I realized I had to remove Michael urgently from Chris' influence. When I talked to Linda about it, she understood perfectly, and saw no problem to let Michael live with us. The problem was Max. Linda didn't want another dog in the house, especially since both were males. Thus began my search for an apartment in La Linea. When I next returned, I found a new bird, a very ordinary diamond mandarin hen. Chris didn't seriously believe he simply could replace our baby. I disliked this hen. It was just loud and stupid, not like our baby, curiously inspecting everything, and sometimes amusingly hopped in one of my shoes. Once again I took Michael aside and discussed with him our situation. I explained to him how difficult it was for me to be 5 days without him. Michael said nothing, but didn't protest either when I suggested to take him there. During this time began the betting for the European Football Cup. Chaos broke loose at work. Almost every day we all had to work overtime. There was no more time for meetings with Warren, but still we sent messages to each other. Linda's son decided to return to England with his family. I had a look at the house he inhabited for rent. It was a very large cottage, however, in need of complete refurbishing. Therefore, it would cost only €200 rent, a real bargain for me, and only 10 minutes away from the beach. Practically in the middle of a large farm with dogs, cats, chicken, etc. I thought it a nice surrounding for Michael. Enthusiastically, I told Michael about it, but he waved off. "You can live there by yourself. I'm staying here." Heavy-hearted, I turned down the offer for the house. Meanwhile, it was getting really stressful at my work. But my colleagues and I, we were one team and held all firmly together. One helped the other. A colleague from the Austrian branch was flown in and accommodated in a corporate apartment. I was offered to share the apartment with her for the duration of the Eurocup, since it was directly opposite of the modern skyscraper our office was in. The girl spoke poor English and needed help to find her way round, most of all because I now worked up to 16 hours daily. Despite these many hours overtime, this was the most beautiful time I spent in Gibraltar. After a long day, I and my colleagues went into the typical English pub next door to our skyscraper building, and sometimes we had plenty. It was always fun in the evenings, and I had myself carried away even in a flirtation with one of our bookmakers. Bianca, who also stayed in Gibraltar, was looking after me though. If I worked throughout the night, I always looked forward to a hearty breakfast with the others, in order to have a swim in the swimming pool on the roof terrace of the posh apartment building, to relax afterwards on one of the comfortable sunbeds. These moments I made clear to myself how well off I actually was, and had no reason to complain. A life of luxury like this, a fantastic salary, of which I supported Michael and Chris easily, including our two households, and still didn't have to worry about money when I took lunch or had a first-rate shrimp cocktail for a treat with my colleagues in a luxurious restaurant at the naval port of Gibraltar. All this couldn't mislead or hide how much I was missing my son. After the kick-off to the Eurocup, it was getting even more serious at work. At the last moment, we received many new customers who wanted to gain, of course, also something from the betting cake. I had to create new master data, check payments, investigate complaints, check bets. There was no end. In addition, I was also feverish, like my colleagues, with the football matches we all followed live on the televisions, installed in our offices. This was because we had to be updated by watching important sport events to clear simple reclamations ourselves without bothering the busy bookmakers with it. We colleagues had an internal bet going, and each one drew a team. The one drawing the winning team won not a negligible amount of money. I drew Greece, and crossed my fingers for them, next to my favorite one, Spain. The Greeks actually won in 2004, under the leadership of the Brazilian coach Filipão. During all this time, keeping the contact by phone to Michael, I also kept the contact to Kathy, and called her from time to time. After it was a little calmer again at work, I tried several times to call her, but without success. At first I thought nothing of it. I was too busy. Besides, she had told me she wanted to fly with Mark and the children to Nigeria. Before I was on my way back from work to El Palo, I stopped at Linda's house, talking to her about it that I hadn't been able to reach Kathy longer time. However, didn't know when exactly she had planned to fly to Nigeria. Linda offered, "Try to call her right now," and asked me to stay for dinner. Suddenly I was overcome with a very strange feeling when I couldn't reach Kathy again. "Linda, something is wrong." I looked up the number of Alex and called her. Unusually reticent, Alex confirmed everything was okay, but I heard in her voice this was not the case. Alex was a bad liar. I angrily demanded her to tell me what was going on. "I had to promise Kathy not to tell anyone, anything, not even you," she stammered. "I'm her mother, and I have the right to know if something has happened," I shouted at her now, seriously concerned. Thus, she reluctantly reported Kathy had been arrested. The children were staying with Alex. "Where the hell is Mark? He's involved in it, for sure," I asked and stated at the same time. "Linda, Also, not entirely understanding, however, noticed my excitation and that I had become pale, was now at my side. Not at all, Rita. He is in Nigeria and knew nothing, but he's on the way to Hamburg. Much more she couldn't tell me, but I noticed Alex was shocked as well, and didn't quite know how to proceed. For her, it had also been a bad surprise. She was now with the two children of Kathy for an indefinite time, additionally to her own two children. I hung up, turned to Linda, and explained what had happened. I must fly to Hamburg. My daughter and her children need me now. Instead of being on my way to El Palo, I turned back to Gibraltar to ask my boss for leave, who wasn't agreeing because I still had no right for vacation. I asked her for an exception with the excuse of a severe illness of my daughter. During the drive to El Palo, I recalled the last phone call I had with Kathy, as she told me about a nightmare that struck her repeatedly. It was a premonition. In this dream, she had a car accident. Darrell was lying on the road in his blood, but she could not help him because she was paralyzed. It was not easy to find a flight in the midst of the holiday season. For 2 days I had to wait until I was sitting in a plane with a destination to the old world I had almost forgotten. At least in Hamburg, the weather was also nice when I landed. I took a taxi to a favorable car rental where I had pre-ordered a small city car. With this I was on my way to Hamburg, Bahrenfeld. Marcus already sat at the window, waiting longingly for my arrival. It drove the tears into my eyes. What would become of these children? This I asked myself when Marcus ran towards me with joy and fell into my arms. Alex had prepared me on the phone. The children knew nothing about it. For them, Kathy was far away in Berlin for a training course. How long is this lie to be maintained? Without a peep from Kathy. This is probably worse for the two than the truth. These two are still small and can cope with the truth, and later they will forget. But they cannot understand why Kathy doesn't call them, so they'll be thinking Kathy loves them no more and has forgotten about them, I argued. Darrell was very reserved, as always, but finally came into my arms when he realized Marcus didn't move from my side. Both of them now reported their mother was in Berlin to school. But she has not even called, Marcus complained. What do you think about it if you paint a picture and we will send it to her? I suggested, while I had to swallow hard. Alex gave me a warning glance. Later in the evening, I climbed up to Kathy's apartment and was shocked when I entered. Kathy would never change. Despite the dishwasher, dirty dishes spread everywhere. Laundry also distributed all over the place. The washing machine, tumble dryer, a basket designated for laundry to press, everything was full of laundry. Floor and carpet appeared like it hadn't seen a cleaning for a long time. The traces of the house search by the police aggravated this first impression, of course. But my only act of the evening, however, was to put out the trash. For the rest, I would have time this whole week. But how fast this week would pass, I realized already the next day. Alex came up and complained she had no more clothes for Marcus and Darrell to change, and dressed them up for the kindergarten and school. I've been up here already, but I can't find anything in this chaos. There's not one complete pair of socks, and Marcus don't have a clean t-shirt anymore. Darrell's sandals are much too small. Maybe you'll find something? Together we searched in all the masses of laundry, but apart from a single sock here and there, found nothing. Inevitably, we came to the conclusion there were no other clothes for the children than the ones Alex already had with her. It was be plenty to do here. My first way was to my old friend and lawyer, Roland Weber. So far, Kathy was without legal counsel. Thus I asked him, and paid him a corresponding advance. Bring Kathy out of there. I know you can do it. If you can't, then no one will. Instead, in the office, we met in a coffee shop after I had described him by telephone the emergency. He first made the compliment I was looking very nice. Spain's sun is very beneficial to you, as I see. But he wrung his hands when I told him about Kathy, whom he had known since she was 13. Also had he represented Mark already in different procedures. Until then, he knew as much as I about the reason for her arrest. After our meeting, he immediately filed a special request for me to visit at the detention prison at Olsenwald. Without this, I would not have had the slightest chance of a visit. It was very strictly regulated, without exception. It didn't matter whether I arrived specially from Spain or anywhere else. In the meantime, I took up my work in Kathy's apartment. The next step, I took Marcus and Darrell to buy new clothes. I dressed the boys new from head to toe. Marcus didn't even want to take off one of the new combinations. After 3 days, I was able to visit Kathy. With mixed feelings, I walked into this old prison building. For me, it was the first time I walked into a prison. My documents were checked. They handed me a key to leave all my things outside in a safe. I had to include even chain and watch. I was allowed only with the clothes I wore to enter the building again. Roland Weber had prepared me by telephone. I was not allowed to bring Kathy anything. Using an X-ray machine, I was examined. A police officer patted my body additionally, and then I waited to be called. After seemingly endless long time, a guard fetched me from the waiting room and brought me to the visitor room, where was nothing but 2 chairs and a table in the middle. Shortly after they brought Kathy, my little girl. Just like it, she appeared this moment, like a little, intimidated girl with tear-stained eyes. When she saw me, she burst into uncontrollable sobs. The guard ignored, contrary to the rules, that I took her in my arms. It cost me all effort not to cry too. This moment I felt so much love for my daughter, like I hadn't for a long time. I could never feel again later. Kathy cried aloud, "My children! I want my children! What will become merely of them?" Reassuring, I talked to Kathy, as the guard asked us to sit down at the respective sides of the table. While I tried to encourage Kathy, I held her hands, caressed them. A little calmer now, she told me she wanted to go to Nigeria with the children to follow Mark. So far I knew this already, but therefore she needed money. In fact, she had done alone whatever she did just to follow Mark, who had left her and the children alone for months. In the period she had worked for the insurance company, she secretly had copied a number of insurance policies to pursue jointly with Mark insurance fraud in large frame. She had been arrested when she cashed a high insurance amount. The cops had watched her for a long time, followed her, and arrested her in the house. Luckily, it was morning time. The children were not in the house, which gave her the time and opportunity to inform Alex. Again she began to cry as she spoke of Marcus and Darrell. I had no idea about the amount of damages, because she was not allowed to talk about it. Nor did I possess a minor idea how this type of fraud would be punished. Has Mr. Weber already visited you? I'm sure he'll get you out of here. Concerning Darrell and Marcus, I would like to take them to Spain until you're back at home. You know they will be well looked after there. I can do much more for them there than if they stay here in Germany. Alex doesn't have the money to take care of the children, not to mention the lack of space in a small apartment. and now with 4 children. Yes, Mr. Weber had visited her already. As for the children, she thought for a moment, replied then, no, they are to remain in their familiar surroundings. Let them stay with Alex. Should I be condemned for a longer time, I will reconsider this again, but I think I will not change my opinion. They shall grow up in Germany. I looked at her thoughtfully. Are you sure you want it like this? She nodded sadly. Kathy, they are your children. It is your decision. I respect. But I'm afraid the youth welfare will sooner or later interfere in this case, and they will not leave the children with Alex. She said nothing. Instead, she told me she was already allowed to be working in the kitchen. She shared a cell with a very nice older woman. This woman was taking care of her. Then the 1 hour we had, and in which I saw my daughter the last time in my life, was over. Outside the gate, all the control and discipline I kept during the visit was gone. I couldn't hold back my tears. I still cried when I sat inside the car. Sadly, I spent the afternoon with a sequel to clean and tidy Kathy's apartment. Taking coffee with Alex, I carefully touched this delicate subject when we were alone. Alex, how it should proceed with Darrell and Marcus. The youth welfare will permit in no case they stay with you. I would like to take them to Spain, but Kathy is against it. For Alex, this was not a question. She would fight for the children if she had to. I knew Alex long enough to know she could actually give those children the most important, more important than money and space. She loved them as if they were her own children. With a heavy heart, I decided to fight on her side. At the next meeting with Roland Weber, I implored him to let all his relations and contacts work so the youth welfare would not take the children from Alex. But then I learned the extent of Kathy's crime. The Criminal Investigation Department had already since long been mainly after Mark, who disappeared in time. The prosecutor had long known Kathy and Mark were doing frauds together. The state prosecutor wanted Mark, and therefore she would not release Kathy unless Mark would hand himself in voluntarily. Only then she would be willing to do a so-called trade. Is there nothing you can do? What about a bailout? I asked with last hope. Before me I saw the sad eyes of Marcus and Darrell, who already missed their mother a lot. Roland Weber shook his head, resigned, asking me, absolutely nothing. Bailout? Do you have 100,000 euro for bail? This would be approximately the amount the state prosecutor would even start to think about it. Do you have an idea of how high the total amount of damages caused by the two? 400,000 euro. Cassie's thing alone she was arrested for had a value of 60,000 euro. I held my breath. My stomach cramped up when I put the next question. How many years we have to reckon with? Roland Weber looked at me a long time in silence. 10 years are the minimum for capital crimes in this altitude. With good comportment, she may be out after 4 years. The tears ran open down my face. Is there nothing we can do? I still have 18,000 euro from the sale of my bar in Spain. I would use everything for her release. This statement he took down in written form, but didn't comment it. There was nothing I could do, neither for Kathy, nor to bring those sad eyes of these two children to shine. When Marcus additionally remarked innocently, I think Mom has forgotten us. I had to leave Alex's house, not to let them know anything. But this evening I invited Marcus for cinema, with all bells and whistles. Popcorn, Coca-Cola, ice cream. It was shown a Harry Potter movie, and I bought for Marcus a Harry Potter magic hat. At least this evening Marcus should be a little happy, and he truly was. Long afterwards he would talk again and again about this evening. None of us knew this also was a farewell forever. Or did I own a premonition? I spontaneously decided to visit my parents again. It was only for one day. We didn't have much to say to each other. Probably they were surprised. I was very quiet and thoughtful. And still at my parents' place, I received a call from Roland Weber, informing me the preliminary hearing would take place the following Monday. There I had good chances to see Kathy again, because the prison directory were not giving an additional exclusion permission for visit. On this Monday evening, my flight would go back to Spain. My father was frying a mountain of meatballs I should take for Kathy and the children. When I said goodbye to my parents, he was crying. Did he also know this was the last time? The weekend Alex and I spent in joint walks with the children, and Monday morning I found myself early in the premises of the court, which is in close proximity to the prison. I was much too early and waited for hours, until I finally caught sight of Roland Weber, who brought the disappointing message. Kathy had been brought through the underground passage from the prison to the court, and I would not see her. She was already inside the courtroom. The hearing lasted 1.5 hours. I was not allowed to attend, because it was not a public hearing. When the door opened, Roland Weber came up to me with a tense face. The prosecution demands a prison sentence of 8 years, since Kathy was arrested for the first time. But the judge has not made a decision yet. Kathy initially will remain in custody. Everything began to spin around me. Roland Weber asked anxiously whether I could really go back alone to Bahrenfeld. I nodded. 8 years. She would go down the drain in prison, and the children? I never returned unhappier to Spain as this night, although I didn't have a lot of time to brood. A taxi took me the all too familiar road to El Palo. I entered the little cottage. Chris was still up, waiting for me. Michael was already asleep. After a short glance at him, I went downstairs to report to Chris what had happened. Sometimes even Chris could show emotions, as in this moment, as he listened to me attentively. Why didn't you bring the children? We can take care of them here. After a few cups of strong coffee, I was on my way to La Linea. But it was suddenly very different. I had no more vantage or motivation. The area of Linda's house struck me more gloomy and somber than ever. There were no streetlights, and somehow it reminded me of a cemetery. Tired, I reached Linda's house, where I just had time to shower and get a move on, to be confronted soon after with the daily stress at the border. To me it was sick. Gone were the days when I was stuck in the slam the same time as Warren, in the line of cars, each one in his car. I on the right and he on the left lane. If he didn't see me, he called me on my cell phone to ask which alteration I was. So he somehow crept past the other cars until he was at the same height as me, and we communicated from car to car. Before Kathy's arrest, I had lent him money so he could offset his rent arrears. Since then he was no longer seen. Without interest I did my work, and just as disinterested accepted my winning of the Eurocup. The next day I was called by the head of the bureau. She asked me bluntly how I could spend my free time during the Eurocup in the office, following soccer games, and then write it down as working time. Obviously, someone here was playing a dirty game on me. Bianca suspected, just as I, it was one of the new girls, wanting to distinguish themselves. My colleagues were close behind me and testified, in front of my head, this was absolutely not the case. However, this gave me the rest, and my decision was clear. I would no longer continue. I didn't change my opinion either when I received the call from Roland Weber, him telling me Kathy would be released in the next days from the detention prison. This is not least thanks to you, because the judge was very impressed by the fact that you were prepared to sacrifice all your savings for the release of Kathy, and that you have been sitting outside the door and waited during the hearing. The point, however, was Mark voluntarily handed himself to the police, which on the same day had an arrest warrant issued against him. In the next few days, the official decision will be made. That was typical Roland Weber. Through his friendly relations in all possible directions, he already knew much even before an official verdict. However, he never woke false hope, put things rather negative, more than they were. I was relieved and went the last time to celebrate with my colleagues. In this remote village where I lived with Linda, I was feeling very uncomfortable, while in La Linea it was now raging with life during the summer. I had not handed in my notice yet. Instead, tried to make one last attempt. One of the bookmakers offered to help me buy a condo in La Linea. He introduced me to a friendly broker who showed me some little nice new apartments. This agent gave me the tip to ask my boss for issuing a certification for the bank, stating I had already been working more than 1 year in the company. With my salary would otherwise be absolute no problem for a financial plan. Again I talked with Michael. He insisted he would not want to leave El Palo, no matter what I offered him. I realized sadly it was a big mistake to have left him his will. Perhaps Jefferson had completely been right. Still, I suffered from this failed relationship. I could not forget him. And what I had finally won? Nothing. I was lonely. 5 days a week, separated from Michael without him being disturbed about it in the least. Towards Linda, I reacted irritated. Her maternal nature bugged me now. From my colleagues, I withdrew myself and lived only for the 2 days I spent with Michael and at the beach of El Palo. The sea of the Atlantic coast in Gibraltar was for me much too cold to go swimming. Recently, I had a new friend in El Palo, to whom I happily returned each time, Andres, the new employer of Alicia, with whom I often took coffee and had a chat at the reception. I liked this very handsome Spaniard from Madrid, with his shoulder-length curls. Our first meeting had been very funny indeed. If Alicia was in the hostel, she held day and night time a coffee ready for me. However, this Andres could not know when I ordered a coffee at the small bar near the reception. Then received of him the answer, coffee was only served for breakfast. I laughed out loud and explained to him, I'm Rita, neighbor and friend of Alicia. For me, there is always a coffee. Oh, so you belong to this chaotic family next door, always entering the house by marching with a ladder through the hotel garden, climbing over the balcony. Perhaps your son should learn to take his keys with him instead of forgetting it. The beginning of a friendship. Of Michael, I learned Chris had been with him to the feria in Malaga, and he had been even dancing in one of the clubs. With me, he had never been dancing for once. Suddenly and unexpectedly, I received a call from Jefferson. He implored me how much he loved me, was longing for me, and wasn't able to forget me in any case. Me perdoe, meu amor, foi errado que eu fiz. I immediately applied for vacation and flew for 10 days to Sao Paulo. One for me unknown destination. From what I saw on the way from the airport to the hotel, where Jefferson had reserved a room for me, I was not very enthusiastic. There was no beach, and I wondered what I should do here 10 days while Jeff worked. But when I was in Jeff's arms, I forgot this idea. Only now I was aware again of how much I loved this man. After a night of passion, we made love in the morning once again under the hot shower. Later, Jeff showed me from the balcony of the hotel room the restaurant where he worked as a maître, head of service. Come over there this lunchtime, and please don't walk so carelessly through the area like in Fortaleza. This is Sao Paulo, and much more dangerous. If you go somewhere, then go without purse and camera, and be careful. Before he went to work, he gave me an affectionate kiss and whispered in my ear, Te amo, mi amor. I quickly found out I was in the vicinity of one of the main streets of Sao Paulo, Avenida Paulista, where among many banks, many fine restaurants, street cafes, and excellent shops and boutiques are situated. So I did the only thing that was to do, shopping. For hours I sat in a street cafe in the sunshine and had aromatic coffee while watching the people passing by. At noon I walked to the restaurant where Jeff worked, had an excellent lunch. The menu had a broad variety: grilled or breaded and fried chicken breast, pizza, barbecue, fish, international and native food. Drank some more coffee and then got me ready to leave. There was no quarrel with Jeff, but I knew he didn't like it, me walking around alone in Sao Paulo. Although he hardly had time for a few words with me, he would have rather seen if I stayed there the rest of the day, waiting for him. But this was too stupid for me. I preferred to read inside the room of the hotel or to follow the cable television program. Jeff worked up to midnight, returning to the hotel just to have enough time to shower in order to spoil me with affection, to make love with me, and then to fall asleep holding me in his arms. This I was bored of, so I asked the hotel reception for a good club. I landed in the Chiscaret, where I ordered Mexican food and for the first time listened to the music of the band Salsa Bomba. The guys played really good salsa music. I was totally thrilled and almost sad having to go back to the hotel at 11:30 because I knew Jeff would not be thrilled if he didn't find me in the hotel. At the entrance of the club, the CD of Salsa Bomba was sold, but since I was in a hurry, I didn't buy it. Jeff was pissed when I told him I was out. The next day, he still offended me, even when I stayed longer than usual in the restaurant, and sipped 3 caipirinhas out of pure frustration. Ultimately, however, he realized I was simply bored and spent his day off showing me the city of Sao Paulo, and in the evening he also took me out. We spent a wonderful evening with a romantic meal and a lot of salsa music. Jeff was a very good dancer, not only for her, but also to salsa music. On the way back in the taxi, he kissed me passionately and this way he made love to me that night. Stay with me, Rita. Let's get married. I promise I will always make you happy, he implored me. But I didn't like Sao Paulo and resisted from living there. Jeff left no stone unturned, took holidays for the remaining days, and showed me the real nice sides of Sao Paulo. We visited the large park Ibirapuera, the zoo. We went to the tropical house of Butantan, where we could see all possible types of exotic snakes. In the evening, he took me to a live samba show, which was most memorable for me. On the marketplace, he showed me a variety of exotic fruits existing in Brazil. Once again, I noticed many women were giving Jeff admiring looks. With his black, well-cut hair and his black eyes, which had always a mischievous smile in them, this man was very handsome. When I looked at him in those moments, I was sure I really loved this man and wished nothing more than to be at his side. On our sad farewell, I promised to return soon to stay, in order to gain time. No question, I loved Jeff, but my heart was in Spain, and especially with Michael. Since the arrest of Kathy, I vowed to do everything to keep Michael from embarking in the same direction as her. Where he was, there he was happy and balanced, even began to forge plans for the future, worrying about what he wanted to be. The risk to tear him out of this world, and thus perhaps to destroy everything, was just too high, and Sao Paulo was certainly the wrong place for Michael. It was quite clear to me Jefferson was not willing, under any circumstances, to continue this long-distance relationship. He wanted me, but completely, and not just every few months. And to go so far away from Michael, if I would leave him behind. Behind? With whom? With Chris? I was angry at myself even thinking about it all. It was already hard enough for me, as it was with those 5 days a week without seeing him. Still listless like before, I returned to my job in Gibraltar. However, the tide seemed to turn, and the luck on my side. For when I came back to El Palo the next time and saw Alicia, she made me an unexpected offer. She wanted me to work for her as a receptionist in the hotel. Things were growing over her head since she split from her boyfriend, who had consistently supported her with everything. There was nothing at all for me to think about. Of course, this meant I gave up my high salary, but I would be every day with Michael in El Palo. For me, it was worth it. Alicia couldn't offer me so much money, but therefore was my future position right next door. I only had to go out one door and enter the next one. In addition, there was nothing better for me to work amongst good friends, Alicia and Andres. In addition, Chris had found a job, after he finished school, on a car scrapyard. This meant we earned our living well in an honest way. Kathy was actually released on conditional freedom and happily back home with her children. However, I did wonder how she managed to replace within shortest time the PC, the notebook, and the expensive mobile phone. All of the things seized by the police. I didn't rather want to know, just hoped she would not write herself into shit again.